This is the Trench Art Podcast with your host, David Axe. Today on the pod, open source intelligence analyst Jakub Janovsky. Jakub Janovsky, welcome to the Trench Art Podcast. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thanks for inviting me, David. My work I'm most known for is documenting equipment losses earlier in Syria and Nagorno-Karabakh, and currently in war in Ukraine for the Oryx bloc.
So basically you count not only Russian but also Ukrainian losses by using what we call open source intelligence. How did you get started in this work?
I have always been interested in military conflicts, equipment, etc. And with the rise of social media, it became increasingly easy to quite actively follow those conflicts. So around the start of Syrian civil war, and just when the main phase of the war in Libya was ending, I started to actively track those conflicts. And I started following people who later became known, for example, for Bellingcat and related work and other organizations. And I became friends with some of those people, learned from them. And over time, I have first started archiving the footage, identifying equipment, counting things like for our private Twitter group. And after some years, I have started publishing my own work, and I have joined Oryx.
Walk us through what a typical day looks like for you. I understand you have a day job in Prague, but walk us through your open source intelligence work. How do you do it from the moment you sit down until the moment you log off for the evening?
So essentially, when I am not currently at work, I wake up, start my computer, or just wake it up, and start checking my Twitter account, my Blue Sky, and chat we have with our team members and also our colleagues at Warspotting, which is a similar website as Oryx in terms of purpose, but it is only documenting Russian losses, and it has slightly strict methodology, but on the other hand, they have very useful searchable database. Oryx isn't like all that user friendly, and after I check what there are for various news, etc., new footage, what has been documented, I check if there is anything that needs to be discussed with other team members, maybe some interesting footage, or maybe some discussion about some problematic content, for example, something where we are not certain about identification or whether something is new footage, etc. And currently there is quite significant noticeable decline in both Ukrainian and Russian equipment losses, because most of the fighting is done via infantry, because Russia apparently got tired of losing a company of tanks and BMPs every day. So compared to like this time last year, we are documenting like maybe 1/4 of losses we did previously. So we have currently lighter load. So I check new loss entries, make screenshots, do some editing with that, and post it on the Oryx list. I usually do those updates, or at least public summary of those updates, every 3 days.
So there's an obvious documentation bias in your processes. You're basically using the social media postings of various military units and observers in and around Ukraine who have access to raw footage of from aircraft, from drones, from the ground. You're using this raw footage posted on social media to confirm vehicle and heavy equipment losses. But you can only document losses that are captured on camera. So how accurate is your overall count of losses on both sides of the war?
Well, first, I would note that one of the main differences this makes is that a lot of the losses are documented or the footage is published days, weeks, or even months after they actually happen. But there is still an ongoing flow of data, and like Ukrainians are filming Russian losses, Russians are documenting Ukrainian losses. Very few people on each side are voluntarily going to fill their own ones. But given how much ISR assets everyone has, there is not all that much that escapes being filmed, at least from some drone somewhere, at least in terms of actually destroyed equipment. For equipment that is lightly damaged, etc., first, we don't count lightly damaged equipment. What we count as damaged is things that usually require fairly substantial repair, not something that you can fix over the weekend in some field shop. And that simplifies things for us, because light damage, you would probably write off everything that both sides already they have deployed on the front line. So that's one of the reasons why we avoid minor damage, since it is irrelevant. In a weekend or few days, somebody will fix it. But in terms of accuracy, we obviously have some gaps, since not everything will be filmed. On the other hand, from some private sources with very good access to actual data, at least on Ukrainian side, we got confirmation for one of the categories of equipment that in terms of Ukrainian losses, we were very, very close to the factual truth.
So in your decade of using open source intelligence to tally vehicular losses in various conflicts, what has surprised you? What's the most surprising thing you have learned about this kind of intelligence?
Well, about the OSINT in general, or those
OSINT
conflicts?
in general, and then I'll ask you about Ukraine in particular.
Yeah. Okay. About OSINT in general, I've been quite impressed by how much the connectivity on the battlefield has improved to the point where if it weren't for operational security rules, some battles would be practically live streamed. And actually, in this case, there have been a bit of a regression in, at least in certain aspects, because when I was earlier watching battlefields in Syria from social media posts around 2015, there were battlefield updates just minutes after the events happened, which was absolutely crazy. Obviously, over time, everyone has learned their lesson about operational security, at least to some degree, some actors more than others. But especially adoption of Starlink by pretty much everyone who can get it working has been, over the past few years, extremely important in both armies themselves distribute data, for example, between drone unit and artillery, which is using the data to target the enemy positions, all the way to various logistics, command, etc. Uses, which just a few years ago you would have such a capability maybe on the battalion level HQ, but nowhere near the front line. Nowadays, everyone can have $400 piece of kit that provides you very substantial amount of data transmission and reception, which allows individual vehicles to consume a huge amount of data and enable both publishing a lot of data for our purposes and obviously making the military much more efficient in terms of like cooperation between units, etc. So I think it's a bit underappreciated how much of a force multiplier this has enabled in terms of like improvements in battle management software, etc. But it's also a bit of my area, so I like to talk about it. So.
What has surprised you most about the Ukraine war in particular?
Well, pretty much my biggest surprise was that after Russia completely screwed up the initial phase of the invasion, which I have somewhat predicted, even if like not in all aspects. I actually have expected Russians to do much better in the air than they did. But I was quite surprised that after like early April pullout from northern Ukraine, that Russia didn't like came to Ukraine to negotiate seriously, take whatever deal would be actually available that Ukraine would be willing to take, and not go home, because at that point it was clear that continuing that war would be very, very expensive and would cost Russia a huge amount of resources, which, sure, it had plenty of resources, but those were not recently built, but mostly inherited from the Soviet Union. And so something that once expended is gone. Russia will never, ever rebuild it.
Right, so the Russians are losing, well, have lost more than 20,000 pieces of heavy equipment, tanks, fighting vehicles, howitzers, etc. And as you said, much of that was drawn from old Cold War stocks that cannot be replaced. But that doesn't mean the Russians are losing, right?
No.
Because the nature of the fighting
opinion,
has changed.
Yeah. My opinion on this is that neither side is currently winning, which doesn't mean like exactly great things for either side. Like for Ukraine, it's expensive in terms of like casualties and towns and villages being destroyed and things like that. But Russia likes to pretend that it is a military superpower and not exactly proving their image in Ukraine, because like they are supposed to be competitor with NATO, etc. And based on their performance in Ukraine, I would say they would get completely wiped out in war with with NATO. So. It's a bit of a problem, and one of the factors here is that resources that Russia used to have, or partially still has, for potential conflict with NATO, are being expended in this war against Ukraine. And sure, like Russia will be still making some missiles, tanks, etc. But in terms of like huge numbers that it had before the war from Soviet stockpiles, those are never going to be rebuilt.
On the other hand, Russia, like Ukraine, is developing a new kind of sensing and striking complex, spotting targets and then hitting them with missiles and drones that didn't really exist prior to the wider war. And I haven't seen any other country outside of Russia and Ukraine develop the same kind of system. Russia is, for example, launching hundreds of Shahed attack drones every day on average at Ukraine. That's a deep strike campaign on a scale that I don't think anyone anticipated prior to this wider conflict, that kind of strike complex could be devastating to NATO. No, it's not that the NATO countries don't have the depth of air defenses that they would need to defend against that kind of thing.
Well, I think it's a bit more complicated. First, if in case of war against NATO, the factories making those drones would get wiped out pretty much on day one, just like many other strategic targets within Western Russia. And we have seen quite a few good cases that while Russia has quite a lot of air defense, it also has a lot of Russia. And as a result, not everything can be defended, and a lot of that has defenses has them only to a certain level, and very limited amount of potential targets will have defenses to deal with, for example, stealthy cruise missiles or similar threats. So it's, I think it is an issue, but we have also seen evolution in terms of counters from both Ukrainian drones and from some Western systems like the APKWS guidance packages for Hydra 70mm rockets, which make very cheap interceptors and like single fourth generation fighter jet that wouldn't be like all that useful near the front line, at least until the Russian Air Force and air defense would be smashed by stealth aircraft. Those fourth generation aircraft could each carry like 28 of those and hunt Shaheds, etc. And even in Ukraine, we see that like half of those are eliminated by electronic warfare, which obviously NATO has in much more significant amount and much more sophisticated than what Ukraine has available in most places, at least. So yeah, I'm sure that it would be a problem and it would cause quite a bit of damage, but I don't think Russia would be able to sustain it because both those factories and obviously munition depots and logistics within Russia would very quickly be suffering significant amount of destruction and the amount of damage that just the United States Air Force can do over a weekend is probably more than Ukrainian drones and Air Force can do to Russia in a couple months. So it's kind of like if you look at different wars, not all of them are easily comparable. For example, recent like 2-week war, slightly less than that, between Israel and Iran has shown that Israel, with its F-35s, sophisticated weapons being used against air defenses, and obviously ground infiltration of various standoff munitions, have allowed them to essentially wipe out Iranian air defense on day one, pretty much, or maybe day two at most. And if that happens, like sure, it wouldn't happen that fast against Russia, but it's not like they are doing all that great even against just Ukraine. And NATO has both numerical and technological advantage that is whole levels above what Ukraine has.
So you say neither side is winning this wider war. From my point of view, and please correct me if you disagree, the three big, let's say, operational and strategic gaps, weaknesses in the Ukrainian war effort would be inadequate mobilization resulting in far too few infantry in the roughly 130 ground combat brigades in the Ukrainian armed forces. I would say a lack of the best long-range air defenses, specifically for destroying ballistic missiles and cruise missiles and larger drones. And also an inability on the side of Ukraine to create a persistent, sustainable advantage when it comes to small drones and countermeasures against small drones, especially electronic warfare. What do you think of those, of my three identified weaknesses? Am I wrong?
Yeah. I mostly agree with first one, but I would highlight that part of the manpower problem is the able problem of troops who are deserting or going home or whatever. Because at least from what I'm hearing, that number is actually similar or maybe higher than the number of actual casualties per month. If political and military leadership would implement changes to at least significantly reduce that problem, it would help with the frontline manpower situation. So it wouldn't necessarily require mobilizing more people if you don't have so many desertions. In terms of air defense, I completely agree. It's from the material standpoint probably the biggest vulnerability that Ukraine has. There are some improvements in terms of defense against drones and maybe cruise missiles, but definitely it's a problem. In terms of drones, the impression I have from both Ukrainians and Russians that Ukraine actually has advantage in this area, and quite substantial one, at least in outside of areas where some elite Russian units are deployed. The problem is that the Russian ground advantage in terms of manpower and equipment is so large that those drones can't do everything. So Ukraine has advantage in this area, but it's not sufficient to counterbalance all the advantages that the Russian ground forces have.
Now, on the Russian side, if I had to identify Russian weaknesses, certainly it wouldn't be manpower. But we do see with the demechanization of the Russian armed forces, owing in part to the loss of these 20,000 vehicles and the inability of Russian industry to fully replace those losses, but also as a result of changing doctrine, where the Kremlin is preserving what mechanized forces it has left rather than just expending them on the front line in Ukraine as it has been doing for 3 years. So the demechanization of the Russian armed forces means that there's almost no prospect, barring a total collapse of Ukrainian defenses, there's almost no prospect for Russia making a major breakthrough along the front line that would dramatically change the course of the war. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree with this, and I think one of the potential issues here is that with reduced use of armored vehicles, especially tracked ones, if Ukraine can adapt with classical tools of anti-infantry defenses, so everything from anti-personnel mines, caltrops against light vehicles so that they puncture their tires and crash somewhere, barbed wire or modern day concertina wire. If Ukraine manages to scale these defenses sufficiently to make light infantry and what I would call motorized cavalry assaults non-viable, or at least much less useful than they currently are, Russia would be in quite significant bind, because reintroducing tanks and IFVs in significant numbers would mean sacrificing very large amount of those vehicles, and Russia still have a lot of them. But this war has already chewed through very significant percentage of what Russia had, and it's a question of how much they intend to preserve beyond this war for potential future use in other conflicts, or just to be able to at least pose a threat. in some scenarios. So I think this is a potential weakness of the current Russian approach. And while they are still getting enough volunteers with those cash payments, the quality of that manpower isn't exactly great. So it's useful, but probably not something that you would want to use against NATO. So, and I think we are starting to see even like Russian officials acknowledge that Russian economy is starting to like substantially struggle in terms of like exhaustion of resources that Russia had at the start of the war. And since oil price isn't as high as it used to be in previous years, it's going to be a trouble. But obviously, I don't expect Russia to collapse like Soviet Union, like overnight or anything like that. I expect that the regime will be able to improvise and work with short-term solutions for quite some time. After all, we have seen many regimes all over the world to manage to do that for a long time. But I suspect that they probably won't be able to further increase how much they are spending on the war against Ukraine, and that's probably going to limit how much they can like further expand to wartime production, and especially when they will have to invest in some areas that they have previously neglected.
So I want to play a little mental game. I want you to imagine that you are a 4-star general sitting in the capital of some Western country, the United States, Europe, somewhere in Europe. You're observing the war in Ukraine. What reforms do you put in place to adapt your military to the new technology, the new tactics that you're seeing in Ukraine? What do you change? What are the most urgent things that need to change?
Obviously, it would first depend on what resources I currently have, whether I have like a fairly modern force or whether I need to completely re-equip the force. Let's imagine the second case with substantial budget increases, so that I can actually start thinking about what to buy instead of like hunting for scraps somewhere. But in that case, I would probably first look what I need to buy, like in terms of best bang for the buck, and also what systems are less promising, especially like legacy ones that I might want to cut, especially if they are expensive, because that will give me more space to buy a new system and reallocate people that previously worked on that equipment to, for example, form new drone units and things like that. First thing I would look is definitely make multi-year order of munitions of all kinds, from 155mm shells and 120mm mortar shells, rockets for HIMARS or similar systems. But in terms of like weapons procurement, and support systems, I would first look at how much manpower I have available, and based on that structure units, possibly build new ones if my budget allows it, especially if it's increasing. But first, I would definitely look at relatively low-cost enablers. So establishing drone units, at least, obviously depends on the size of the army. Let's say it's Germany. At least in that case, it makes sense, like to build brigades and things like that, not playing with platoons. I would probably establish at least a couple of dedicated drone brigades and smaller scale units within each company, brigade, division. But those two brigades would be specialist units with appropriate equipment and training that would act independently and as a force multiplier wherever they would be placed. And I would definitely order a significant amount of munitions so that, and in terms of like equipment, etc., I would definitely post specs that would highlight less of a need for like passive defense, so like thick frontal armor, etc., but probably would require new designs that highlight more active defense. For example, having remote weapon stations like those heavy machine guns that many vehicles have on the roof. Have them be able to act as anti-drone defenses with appropriate sensors, etc. Because many of those drones are very easy targets, relatively speaking. Especially like if you have very good cameras, thermal sights, etc., and computer automation. It's not that hard to shoot down quite a lot of them, especially if you have multiple vehicles covering each other's field of view. But all that needs to be fairly systematic and needs to be done at scale, because if only few vehicles have it, you are still going to take significant losses on the modern battlefield. I would definitely invest in electronic warfare, but I would be well aware of limitations it has, because both between AI, fiber optic guidance for FPV drones, etc., and some systems which are simply resistant to electronic warfare, there are limits what it can achieve. So I would definitely focus on hard kill, both against missiles and against drones. But I would be looking for systems which are multi-purpose. For example, as I highlighted, those remote control weapon stations that many AFVs currently already have. There is no reason why they can't serve multiple purposes, among which is drone defense. In terms of like procurement, etc., everyone needs a lot of, especially infantry fighting vehicles and APCs. The war in Ukraine has shown that they are both highly valuable for offensive operations, but you will inevitably lose many of them. So if you want to retake territory somewhere, it's simple reality that you will need them, unless you are willing to sacrifice a lot of soldiers, which Western armies don't tend to like. And I would probably significantly reduce investments in especially attack helicopters, because between their high cost, significant vulnerability, and everyone getting a lot more short-range air defenses, that vulnerability is likely to get only worse. Can you see me? Yeah, sure. And when I have last time looked, like one AH-64 is like half of the price of F-35, so not exactly cheap. So if I am facing someone like Russia with serious air defenses and somewhat serious air force, I would definitely be buying more F-35s. Like for example, Poland is currently doing a serious rearmament program, and in their case, I would probably, instead of like those 96 AH-64s, I would maybe get like quarter of them, and instead get like squadron or two more of F-35s. But like this is like a whole area where you can talk about for hours, like how to build essentially or rebuild military. And actually my friend Pergun, like on YouTube has made multiple videos, like each 1 hour long, about this whole procurement hell. So I'm not sure if it makes that much sense to like talk for like 5-10 minutes about it.
It's okay. It's okay. We can revisit this topic in the future, certainly.
Yeah.
So this is all very very interesting, very useful. Your work, I mean, is very interesting and useful for the layperson, but especially for a journalist like me. I write about the war in Ukraine, but I do so from South Carolina, and my days as a globe-trotting war correspondent are well behind me. So I really need the data that you and other open source intelligence practitioners, the data you are able to gather, and I especially appreciate your work because of your long track record, which means that you are reliable. Uh, Given the importance of your work to so many of us, how can we support you?
Well, while I wouldn't mind like institutional funding for our work, I prefer sending individual contributors more towards people like Konstantin on Twitter and other people who are collecting money for equipment that is needed on Ukrainian front lines. So in this case, I think it's best just for people to organize help for Ukraine however they want and depending on their resources and options. Obviously, if some institutional actors would be listening, actually hiring more people and or like giving some decent contracts for people to do this without the institutions having like editorial control over the content would be great. Because after all, like I know quite a few people who are in the field just like me doing this in their free time, and inevitably those people will for one reason or another leave over the years. And it will be significant loss for the community because nobody can do this alone, and everything. For example, we depend on significant amount of people who just geolocate the footage or provide certain analysis of the data, and we just try to do our small part. But so obviously, if institutions would be willing to support it on more sustainable level, it would be great. But otherwise, we'll do what we can.
Jacob, thank you so much for taking the time and for joining us. I hope that we can talk again and keep up your invaluable work. Personally, from me, and I'm sure from all of my readers, thank you.
Thank you, David, for inviting me. This has been interesting chat.